For those of us who spend too much time online, it seems that farmers are frequently under the gun for a range of issues, from greenhouse gas emissions to GMOs. But despite the occasional hue and cry from some quarters, recent data suggests that the average consumer actually holds the U.S. farmer in relatively high regard. Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a deeper look at big issues in the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries. I'm your host, Andy Vance. Thanks for joining us. In this episode, we talk with one of the leaders of the United Soybean Board about a recent consumer survey that found farmers rank as the most trusted members of the food supply chain. We'll also discuss how the soybean industry is working to quantify and promote on-farm efforts to combat climate change and to produce a more sustainable animal food supply. This podcast is sponsored by Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production and their science-hearted podcast, Food Chain Chats. Join me to hear insights on how the food supply chain is taking their experiences from 2020 disruptions into 2021. You can subscribe wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Mace Thornton is Vice President of Communications and Marketing Strategy at the United Soybean Board, the farmer-led organization mandated with administering the farmer-funded soybean checkoff. Thornton explains what the checkoff learned from its recent consumer survey, as well as what checkoff-funded research is doing to help livestock and poultry producers answer the call to produce more sustainable meat, milk, and eggs. Mace, the United Soybean Board does quite a bit of work in a lot of different arenas of agriculture, from animal agriculture to industrial uses. But I was reading the results of a consumer survey that USB funded looking at the needs and perceptions of people relative to their food supply. Obviously, the soybean farmers have a big role to play in that and in a lot of different fronts that we'll get into in a moment. But let's start with the top line. What did you learn from the survey, and maybe even take a step back from that? And what was the impetus for doing this research in the first place?
This survey was done back in December of this past year. We had 1,502 consumers, and we really wanted to look at a wide range of kind of different trust issues that might be out there on their minds. One of the key things that it revealed to us was there was strong consumer trust in farmers when compared to other stops along the food supply chain. About 78% of the consumers said that they felt farmers were the most trusted member of the food supply chain, which was very encouraging. I mean, I don't think that's unlike a lot of the other results we have heard in the past. People tend to really have that very positive view of farmers, especially farmers who they might know or who are local to them. They also had a little bit higher opinion of farmers who grow crops, including soybeans.
When you looked at the results and started pulling those apart, on one hand, I think about research that's been done in the past, and farmers have traditionally, I think, ranked very highly in these types of surveys. You think about the job titles that get the most respect, it's maybe firefighters and members of the clergy and so on. And yet at the same time, maybe it's because I spend too much time online on Facebook and Twitter and so on. We've been talking for, 20 years about the gap between producers and consumers. So when you saw the results, no doubt it was encouraging, but were you surprised at all at the level of affinity the respondents had for farmers and food producers?
In our lines of work, where we have full view to all the static that's out there, it's always surprising to see that number be so high, because you see a lot of members of the vocal minority who really have a bone to pick with modern agriculture. They simply, don't like it for one reason or another. And they equate that to, they connect that right away to farmers. But we think that whenever we see a very positive 78% number like we did, we think what we're actually seeing there is a connection that the average consumer, the average eater, if you will, is making in regard to the safety and stability of U.S. grown food. And they're making that connection back to the farmer. I think they're thinking about sustainability, and that's something that I can get into here in a little bit. But there's a lot of sustainable practices that are going on, as you know, at the farm level. And we believe that as consumers find out more about those types of things that farmers are putting in place, that appreciation number is probably even going to get higher. Why it's important to us to really find out about what's on consumers' mind is, I mean, it's this. We know that human food from soy doesn't make up that big of a slice of the pie, right? You look at the composition of soybeans, breaks down to about 80% soybean meal, 20% soybean oil. Of that soybean meal side, 97% of that goes to animal feed. The livestock sector is a huge market for our soybeans. About 3% of that meal goes into human food products, whether it is some sort of soy-specific food or a soy-based protein alternative. On the oil side, about 68% of the soybean oil does go into food production. But again, you're starting already with a smaller piece of that pie, only 20% of the bean compared to 80% for the soybean meal. While that is a smaller part of the pie, we know that when it comes to the reputation of soy, those consumers who come into contact with soybean oil or soy foods are going to be making up 99% of what we would consider the reputation of U.S. soy. So that's why it's so important for us to have that contact and understand the issues that are on the front burner for America's consumers.
You referenced that sustainability component. I definitely want to dig into that a little bit because I think there's a bit of a two-way street here. You know, on one hand, it's good for I think farmers and whether it be soybean farmers are paying into the checkoff, or whether it be, you know, folks in our audience who are end users of that soybean meal you talked about and animal feed. There's an important component of understanding where your customers' heads are, or where those food eaters, consumers' heads are on this. And at the same time, I think you hit the nail on the head. Well, there's a great story to tell from the farm about sustainability and the work that livestock producers and maybe most especially the farmers who are producing animal feed are doing to do that job more sustainably. Making that two-way street, I guess, is what I'm saying at. So when you looked at the survey data, that message came through the data, and I think it sounds like from what you and I have talked about, there are some connections to work that the soybean checkoff is doing on the sustainability front as well.
Right, absolutely. The thing that I think that from the survey itself, the thing that was encouraging to us was, even though people don't really have a good connection to or a great understanding of what sustainable practices are being put in place, there were still 70% of the consumers really say that they supported U.S. domestic agriculture. Again, I think that comes down to they have that strong preference for U.S. when it comes to purchasing food. They want to make sure that their food comes from U.S. sources. Again, a lot of those other factors come into play, like safety, quality, and sustainability. But we really think that as people find out more about that sustainable connection, there were indications that it was going to be able to really propel their opinions of U.S. farmers to that next higher level. So we're going to be focused on really looking at soy and looking at soybean farmers as catalysts for sustainable improvement. Soybeans can be viewed as that very effective vector to help spread sustainability. So 2/3 of the people who took the survey, the respondents, felt even more positive about U.S. farmers, U.S. soy, after they had heard those really basic facts that are provable about what soybean farmers do in regard to sustainability.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I was thinking there's a stat I read from one of your colleagues that we've successfully reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 38% per metric ton since 1980. So that's a pretty massive, and not for nothing. Like, we can tell a similar story across other related commodities. I was on a webinar earlier this week in the beef cattle space where we're telling a similar story. Dairy cattle space, a similar story, producing more with fewer animal units. In this case, you're producing more soybeans with fewer greenhouse gas emissions. It's all part of that sustainability puzzle. Now, I understand correctly, you're also working on the idea of taking this concept of sustainable soybean production and actually trademarking it. Tell me a little bit more about that before we move on to some of the other things that the Checkoff's working on in the animal ag space.
The insight the consumer poll showed us is that their opinion about farmers in US soy really explodes when they have that greater understanding of what is going on in the environmental sustainability area on the farm. That increases soy's popularity as both a feed source that offers somewhat of a halo effect to meat producers, but it's also a sustainable source of food for humans compared to other plant proteins. And that's going to drive demand for soy across the country. And it's ultimately going to drive that value back to our farmers, because that's what the soybean checkoff is all about, driving value back to farmers in a meaningful way. And again, that's just one example of why, you can hear a lot of us who work for the soy checkoff referring to soy as the magic bean. So we wanted to share that feeling that we have for soybeans with other folks in a really visible way. So what we are doing is that we have entered into a pilot phase of offering a sustainable US soy trademark that companies can actually put on their packaging. And what that shows, first of all, I want to emphasize, we're in the pilot phase for that. But what it shows right off the bat is in this country, because of participation in farm programs, participation in conservation programs, other type activities in the regulatory space that farmers have to follow to really take care of the land and be in the business of food production, that checks a lot of the boxes for sustainability. Certainly at the international level, that's recognized. And so we wanted to make sure that at the domestic level, we had that similar kind of recognition that farmers are doing a great job already of taking care of the environment. And, it's time for them to get some credit for that. Are all farmers the same? Are all farms the same? No, they're not. Some are going to have environmental challenges. Others are going to not have the same challenges. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but there are a lot of things that have happened, as you know, at the farm level in regard to environmental sustainability within the past 5 years. 10 years, 15 years ago, were we talking a lot about cover crops? No, I wasn't, but there's so many things that have happened. As we take this trademark effort further down the road, we're gonna put some additional teeth into it and work with some other folks who have specialties in the area of providing measurable and provable metrics about what farmers are actually doing at the farm level to even become further emboldened and embodied in the sustainable environmental movement. So be on the lookout for that. We're really kind of excited about it. It's a cool little logo. It's got the rows of a soybean field with a grain bin and a equipment shed in the background. Catchy little thing. Looks like a farm when people see it. So again, we're excited about that going forward.
I love that component you mentioned about, being verifiable, quantifiable. It's super important in being able to continue to carry that message to the consuming public in terms maybe they can understand and appreciate, and it not just be fairy dust and, us saying, hey, we're doing this. I want to shift into area of interest for the bulk of our listening audience in animal agriculture. You made the point right off the bat that 97% of soybean meal is going into animal feed, and so obviously there's a great relationship between soybean production and food animal production. What are some of the things that Checkoff is working on, whether it be research or promotion in the animal ag space at the moment?
A lot of the research money that recognizing that livestock in our friends in the barnyard part of agriculture are so important to us, to the soybean sector as being a market, that 97% of soybean meal, that's a hard number to argue with, Andy. So our farmers know that. And because we are a farmer directed organization, they fund a lot of the research that comes through the soybean checkoff directly related to either providing a higher quality product for the livestock sector, where there are opportunities to produce a bean that gives them the opportunity within the feed yards or within the livestock barn to get better performing animals from the nutrition that they provide them through soy. So that's just one example, but there are a few more. We know that there are a lot of other issues around livestock agriculture kind of related to continuing to have the public trust. And so we are involved in a coalition effort at a couple of different levels. I personally have been involved in a coalition effort with NAMI, North American Meat Institute, that is around the big issue of building trust in meat products. And a lot of the things that are involved there are really reaching out again to that consumer audience. It's kind of a communications led effort, but making sure that our consumer audience in the meat space, they fully understand the commitment that livestock farmers have. And from the soy perspective, again, because of our sustainability profile, I feel like we have a bit of a halo effect that we can pass along to the livestock sector because of the overall sustainability of soybeans as a feed source for them.
Well, and there again, I think that's an important part of telling that story, because so many times when you'll see food animal production in the crosshairs relative to its environmental impact, a lot of that criticism falls back on this whole concept of the life cycle analysis. Obviously, feed production is a good part of that. So as we're able to more and more quantify what it takes to produce a bushel of soybeans or metric ton of soybean meal and so on, that helps move that story into a space that if I'm a poultry producer, if I'm a pig producer, if I'm a dairyman, whatnot, I can say, hey, look at this. This is what goes into my animal. And having that research from the soybean checkoff maybe helps make that sales pitch a little easier.
And I would just give you one example, because it really is, it's a heck of a lot more than just lip service, Andy, because just one of the projects that I know that we've been working on in the past is USB has been working with the Foundation for Food and Agriculture around a $3.2 million partnership and research to really build a better bean for our customers in the livestock sector as it relates to protein content and quality. You look at the nutritional bundle of US soy, it's a combination of the protein and the energy components, really unlike any other feed ingredient. And it has that, again, that sustainability differentiator compared to other competitive crops. So when you package that all up, that is a big bundle of value that we are offering the livestock sector. And it's also our way of saying how much we appreciate them being that go-to market for our soybean farmers.
So, Mace, I want to kind of finish up where we started here. We've covered a lot of ground. I think that's really important to feed manufacturers and animal feed end users. But I want to finish kind of where we started with going back to the survey. One of the things I found really interesting was sort of a bit of specificity in one of the survey questions related to domestic agriculture, that the support from the consumers that were surveyed, it was really important to purchase domestically grown food products. Now, knowing how complex and integrated and global our food system is, and the amount of soybeans and other feed ingredients that we export abroad and so on, how important do you think it is for the U.S. agriculture sector and or our partners in food production, manufacturing, marketing, retail, and so on, to focus in on this idea of supporting the domestic agriculture industry?
The survey very clearly showed that about 70% of the consumers have that clear opinion that they feel like U.S. grown food products from U.S. grown crops are preferential to food products from other sources, whether that is in regard to the overall safety of U.S. food, the perception of the higher quality of U.S. food, or the fact that maybe the sustainability message of what our farmers are doing to protect the land starting to get out there. I think it's probably a combination of all that. But the key to continuing with that trend is innovation. We think that there will be additional gains to be had, not only in consumer appreciation for American grown food products, but also a higher understanding overall as innovation leads to additional advances in that environmental sustainability area. We sponsor a lot of innovative type projects. We have it's kind of like the Shark Tank program. We have an innovation project called the Soy Innovation Challenge. We just recognized 3 or 4 upstart companies that were bringing new ideas into the marketplace. Anything from really providing better ways to be stewards of the land, monitoring greenhouse gases as they are being able to connect that information to the blockchain, being able to trace advancements and detailed nutrition information back to the farm. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of innovation out there, and I think that's only going to build onto the mystique you're currently seeing about people's preference for U.S. grown food and agricultural products.
So, Mace, one of the things I'm thinking about as we kind of focus on domestic consumers and their preferences and so on is that the average consumer is a lot more concerned, or at least aware of climate issues. This whole kind of big grab basket of climate related issues. We see it discussed fairly frequently in the press, but also in the social media areas. What are your thoughts on the role soybean producers and farmers in general have to play in advancing that discussion in a productive way?
There are a couple of ways we're advancing it right now through a couple of different projects that come through the soy checkoff. One was we teamed up with US FRA, US Farmers and Ranchers in Action, to really think about beyond consumers, how can we jumpstart and create even more disruptive change perhaps around sustainability in the soy space, in the US agricultural space. So we worked with them on a report that shows that U.S. agriculture has the potential to be the first net negative greenhouse emission sector throughout the entire U.S. economy. And that can be accomplished through climate smart agricultural practices. What we know needs to happen to really kick that down the road is that we need some transformative investments from other folks in the financial industry and elsewhere to really invest in U.S. agriculture, because our farmers and ranchers, they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We feel like, given the amount of innovation we see coming online, by about half between now and 2025, from about 9.9% currently to about 3.8%. And ultimately, we think agriculture, crop production agriculture in particular, will be seen as a carbon sink maybe as early as 2035, with maybe as much as about 4%, negative 4% of total US greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 being taken up by our farmland. But we got to have the investments in technology to make sure that trend continues. And USFRA is working on that. The other thing that I wanted to point out is it's not just the soy industry. We have partnerships across all of agriculture and into a lot of the soy value space at the retail level, at the CPG level. We are working on a project right now called the MOU Alliance that is all about the sustainable feed supply, establishing a blueprint for that. We're working with the National Corn Growers and the National Pork Board to create what is being called a carbon neutral pig for a certain retail store that has an outlet in just about every town across America. We're hoping to do that by, again, the timeline on that is 2035. The goal is to develop that blueprint that really addresses every aspect of sustainability that is related to pork production, whether that is feed, how feed for the pigs' diets are formulated, and really meeting the end user sustainability expectations by doing those types of things is the target. Retail outlets like Walmart will be able to say, this pig in the year 2035 has been brought to your meat counter without a huge amount of adverse effect on the environment when it comes to greenhouse gases. So that's what we're looking at. It's really an exciting world going forward. And again, it's just another excuse for me to let you know, Andy, that soybeans really are the magic bean.
Yeah, it's a powerful story to tell, and I think one that we're all going to be telling for quite a while, because it's very important on a lot of different levels, and not the least of which being so we can maintain, to kind of come full circle on this topic, but to maintain that high level of trust that consumers have in U.S. farmers. Mace, thanks for joining us on the podcast. For the latest reporting on agricultural research and development and what's happening relative to livestock and animal feed production and how it affects your business, visit our website, feedstuffs.com, and join us in our new virtual community and events platform, Feedstuffs 365. We have new programming every week, 3 to 4 days per week, and you can go back and view all of our previous sessions on demand. It's all part of your subscription to Feedstuffs. This episode was sponsored by Arm & Hammer Animal and Food Production and their science-hearted podcast, Food Chain Chats. Each episode is a science-hearted discussion about the topics that matter most in the world of animal and food production and food safety. You can subscribe wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'm Andy Vance, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Apple and Google Podcasts, or simply visit our website, feedstuffs.com, for future episodes. Until next time, have a great day, and thanks for listening.